May 10, 1940, a 65-year-old man walks into 10 Downing Street knowing he's just inherited the greatest crisis in British history. France is about to fall. Hitler's armies are unstoppable, Britain stands alone. And Winston Churchill, a man who should be enjoying retirement, gardening, painting, spending time with grandchildren, instead faces a choice that will consume the next 5 years of his life. Most people at 65 are winding down. Churchill was about to begin the most grueling marathon any leader has ever faced. 18-hour days, 4 hours of sleep. Constant decisions where every choice means life or death for thousands. The weight of an entire nation's survival on his shoulders. But here's what the history books don't tell you: what it actually cost him. Not the strategic costs, not the military decisions. The personal cost. What does it do to a human being to carry that weight for 5 years straight? What does it cost you, physically, mentally, emotionally, to be the person everyone needs you to be when the world is burning? Churchill saved Britain, everyone knows that. But what did he lose in the process? Imagine for a moment that you're in his position. You're exhausted beyond measure, you haven't slept properly in weeks. You're making decisions that will send young men to die. You're watching your cities burn, your body is failing. Your mind is cracking under the pressure. And you can't stop. You can't rest. Because if you do, everything falls apart. What would that do to you? This is the story the victory celebrations don't tell. This is the story of what one man sacrificed: his health, his peace, his family, his mental well-being, to do what he believed was right. This isn't about Winston Churchill the icon. This is about Winston Churchill, the human being who paid a price most of us cannot fathom. Because when we talk about leadership, we talk about decisions and strategies. We don't talk about what it costs the person making those decisions. We don't talk about the nights they can't sleep, the depression that follows them like a shadow, the relationships that suffer, the toll on their body and mind. Churchill won the war, but what did he lose to win it? If you were 65 years old, would you have taken that burden? Would you have sacrificed your health, your happiness, your final years of peace to save your country? And if you did, what would be left of you when it was over? This is the story of the price one man paid. And it's a story about what we all sacrifice when we choose duty over comfort, responsibility over peace, and purpose over preservation. Let's go back to May 1940 and walk through what Churchill endured, not just to win a war, but to survive it himself. Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill was born into privilege in 1874, the grandson of a duke, a man who seemed destined for leadership from birth. But by the time he reached 65, he'd already lived several lifetimes. He'd been a soldier in India and Sudan. He'd been captured as a war correspondent in South Africa and escaped. He'd served in Parliament for 4 decades. He'd been First Lord of the Admiralty during World War I, a position he lost after the disastrous Gallipoli campaign, a failure that haunted him for decades. He'd been out of power for most of the 1930s, a period he called his wilderness years, warning about Hitler while his colleagues called him a warmonger and an alarmist. He'd written books, painted landscapes, built brick walls with his own hands at his country home, Chartwell. He tried to find peace in a world that kept proving him right about the dangers no one else wanted to see. By 1940, Churchill was not a young man. He was overweight, he drank too much, he smoked cigars constantly. He had a history of what he called the black dog, severe depression that would descend on him without warning, paralyzing him with darkness and despair. His doctor worried about his heart. His family worried about his health. He was at an age when most men step back, slow down, enjoy what time remains. But Churchill never lived like most men. He was also a man who thrived on action, on purpose, on being needed. The wilderness years had been torture for him, not because he lacked comfort or money, but because he lacked purpose. He was a man who needed to be in the fight. And when Neville Chamberlain's government collapsed and Britain needed a wartime leader, Churchill was the only man left who'd been warning about this moment for a decade. So on May 10, 1940, King George VI asked him to form a government. And Churchill, at 65, accepted the burden he'd been preparing for his entire life. But acceptance and endurance are different things. Churchill loved his family, though he wasn't always good at showing it. His wife, Clementine, was his anchor, his fiercest defender, and sometimes his only comfort. They'd been married since 1908, through triumphs and disasters, through his political rises and falls. She knew him better than anyone. knew his moods, his darkness, his needs. She knew what this job would cost him, and what it would cost her to support him through it. They had children, though the relationships were complicated. His son Randolph was difficult, ambitious, often disappointed in himself and disappointing to his father. His daughters loved him but rarely saw him. Churchill was never the kind of father who was present for school plays or quiet family dinners. He was always working, always thinking, always consumed by whatever mission drove him. And now, the mission that would consume him completely had arrived. Churchill's world before May 1940 wasn't peaceful, but it had moments of peace. Chartwell, his beloved home in Kent, was his refuge. He'd spend hours painting the gardens, the landscapes, losing himself in color and light. He'd build walls, literally, brick by brick, finding something meditative in the physical labor. He'd write in the mornings, swim in his pool, enjoy brandy in the evenings. He had routines. He had pleasures. He had a life outside of crisis. All of that was about to end. Because what Churchill faced in May 1940 wasn't just a job. It wasn't just a position. It was total war against an enemy that had conquered most of Europe in a matter of weeks. France was collapsing. The British Army was trapped at Dunkirk. Invasion seemed imminent, and Britain's new Prime Minister was a 65-year-old man with a bad heart, a drinking problem, and a history of depression. Churchill knew what was coming. He knew that from this moment forward, there would be no peace, no rest, no escape. He knew that every decision he made would send people to die. He knew that failure meant the end of Britain, the end of democracy in Europe, perhaps the end of civilization as he understood it. And he knew that the weight of all of this would fall on him, personally, in ways that would break most people. But here's the thing about Churchill. He wanted this. Not the suffering. No one wants that. But the purpose, the meaning. The chance to be the man in the arena, the one who mattered when it mattered most. He'd spent 10 years in the wilderness watching the world drift toward catastrophe, powerless to stop it. Now, finally, he had the power to fight back. The question was whether he'd survive what that power would cost him. His world before the war had balance, work and rest, purpose and pleasure, public duty and private peace. His world after May 10th, 1940, would have only one thing, the war. Everything else would be sacrificed to it. His health, his family, his happiness, his sanity. Churchill walked into 10 Downing Street that day as a man with a full life. He would spend the next 5 years watching that life shrink until nothing remained but the mission. And the mission was simple: survive. Keep Britain alive, outlast Hitler. Win, but what does it cost a human being to do that? What does it take from you, physically, emotionally, spiritually, to be the person your nation needs for 5 years of total war? Churchill was about to find out. And the price would be higher than anyone, even him, could have imagined. This wasn't just about leading a country. It was about what you give up to do it. It was about the version of yourself you lose when duty demands everything. It was about the man who walked into Downing Street in May 1940 and the man who would walk out in 1945, and how different those two men would be. The world was about to change, but so was Winston Churchill. And the cost of that transformation would be measured in sleepless nights, broken health, strained relationships, and a darkness that never fully left him. The war was beginning, and so was Churchill's personal battle to endure it. Churchill's first days as Prime Minister weren't triumphant. They were terrifying. France was collapsing faster than anyone predicted. The French government was in chaos, their military in retreat. The British Expeditionary Force, over 300,000 men, was trapped on the beaches of Dunkirk with the German army closing in. If they were captured or killed, Britain would have almost no army left to defend the island. And Churchill's own government didn't fully trust him. Many Conservative MPs still preferred Chamberlain. Some thought Churchill was reckless, unstable, too aggressive. Lord Halifax, the Foreign Secretary, was pushing for peace negotiations with Hitler through Mussolini. The idea was gaining support. Why fight a war we can't win? Why not negotiate now while we still have leverage? Churchill faced a choice in those first weeks that would define everything: fight or negotiate. Most rational people would negotiate. Britain was alone. The United States wasn't in the war yet. The Soviet Union had a pact with Hitler. The British Army was trapped in France. The Air Force was outnumbered. Invasion seemed certain. What chance did Britain have? But Churchill believed, and this is crucial to understanding him, that some things were worse than death. Surrender to Hitler, compromise with evil, the end of British independence. These were worse than fighting and losing. He believed that Britain's choice wasn't between victory and defeat. It was between dying free or living enslaved. So he chose to fight. And he had to convince his cabinet, his parliament, and his people to fight with him. On May 28, 1940, in a war cabinet meeting, Halifax again pushed for exploring peace terms. Churchill responded with one of the most important speeches of his life, not a public speech, but a private one to his cabinet. He told them that nations that went down fighting rose again, but nations that surrendered were finished forever. He told them Britain would fight on, whatever the cost. Then he went to the full cabinet, all 30 ministers, and gave them the same message. And they rose and cheered him. Not because victory was likely, but because he'd given them something to believe in beyond survival. Honor, defiance, meaning. But belief doesn't win wars. Work does, decisions do. And Churchill was about to enter a routine that would break him slowly, day by day, for 5 years. Here's what Churchill's typical day looked like during the war, and here's what it cost him. He'd wake around 8 a.m. after 4, maybe 5 hours of sleep. Never enough, never restful. He'd immediately begin working from bed, reading intelligence reports, telegrams from commanders, updates from across the empire. Breakfast in bed, still working. Dictating memos to secretaries. Making decisions before most people started their morning. By 11 a.m. he'd be in meetings, war cabinet, chiefs of staff, individual consultations with ministers and generals. Every meeting was a crisis. Every decision was urgent. Should we reinforce this position or abandon it? Should we bomb this target or that one? Should we commit resources here or there? Every choice affected thousands of lives. Lunch was brief, often working through it. More meetings in the afternoon. Visits to bombed areas when possible. Churchill insisted on seeing the damage, walking through rubble, meeting survivors. He wanted to understand what his people were enduring. But seeing it took a toll. Watching your capital city burn night after night, seeing the bodies, the destroyed homes, the terrified faces, what does that do to you? Evening brought more meetings, more decisions, more telegrams. Dinner was late, often with guests, commanders, politicians, foreign diplomats. Churchill used dinner as a working event, discussing strategy, probing for information, building morale. But it meant he was always on, always performing, never resting. After dinner, more work writing speeches, reviewing plans, sending messages to Roosevelt, to Stalin, to commanders in the field. Churchill was obsessive about communication, about knowing everything, controlling everything. He couldn't delegate the way most leaders do because he didn't trust anyone else to care as much as he did. He'd finally get to bed around 2 or 3 a.m. And then it would start again 5 hours later. 7 days a week, no breaks. No vacations for 5 years. What does that do to a human body? What does that do to a mind? Churchill was overweight and out of shape when the war started. The routine made it worse. No exercise except walking through rubble. No sleep, constant stress. Heavy drinking. He drank throughout the day, whiskey and brandy and champagne, using alcohol to manage anxiety and maintain energy. Constant smoking, cigars all day, every day, filling his lungs with smoke. His doctors warned him repeatedly his heart wasn't strong. His blood pressure was dangerous. He was at risk of stroke, heart attack, collapse. He ignored them. How could he rest when Britain's survival depended on him working? But the physical toll was only part of it. The mental and emotional cost was worse. Churchill made decisions every day that sent people to die, not abstract decisions. Specific orders that meant specific people, young men with names and families, would not come home. Send bombers to Berlin. Some won't return. Defend this island. It will cost thousands of lives and might not matter strategically. Evacuate this position. Abandon people who trusted you to protect them. Reinforce this front. Pull resources from somewhere else that will now be vulnerable. Every single day, and he felt it. Churchill wasn't a sociopath who could order deaths without feeling. He mourned every casualty report. He attended memorial services. He wrote letters to families. He knew the weight of what he was doing. But he couldn't stop making those decisions, because not making them meant defeat. There's a moment in 1941 that illustrates this perfectly. British intelligence learned that Coventry would be bombed heavily. They'd broken German codes and knew the attack was coming. But if Churchill evacuated Coventry, the Germans would know Britain had broken their codes, and they'd change them. Losing that intelligence advantage could cost the war. So Churchill let Coventry burn. Over 500 people died. The cathedral was destroyed. And Churchill carried that decision for the rest of his life. Was he right? Strategically, probably. The intelligence from broken codes helped win the war. But what does it do to you, as a human being, to let people die when you could have saved them? How do you live with that? How do you sleep? Churchill didn't sleep. Not well, not peacefully. And he carried these decisions alone. He couldn't share them with family. They wouldn't understand, and it would burden them. He couldn't share them with most colleagues. They needed to see him confident and certain. He could barely share them with Clementine, though she understood more than most. The loneliness of command at that level is something most people never experience. Every leader faces it to some degree, but Churchill faced it at a scale that was crushing. The survival of Western democracy depended on his decisions. The fate of millions rested on his judgment. And he had to make those judgments exhausted, stressed, often with incomplete information, knowing people would die because of what he chose. What would that do to you? Could you carry that weight? And what would be left of you after 5 years of it? Churchill called his depression the black dog. It had followed him since his 20s, periods of deep, paralyzing darkness where nothing seemed worth doing, where hope disappeared, where the world felt meaningless and empty. He'd learned to manage it over the decades. Work helped, purpose helped, action helped. When Churchill was busy, when he had a mission, the black dog stayed away. But during the war, even work couldn't always keep it at bay. The stress was too great, the exhaustion too deep, the weight too heavy. There were days when Churchill couldn't get out of bed, not because of physical illness, but because the darkness had descended and he couldn't see the point. Days when he sat in silence, staring at nothing, unreachable. Days when his staff worried he was giving up. Clementine recognized these episodes. She'd manage his schedule, deflect visitors, give him space. But she couldn't fix it. No one could. Churchill had to fight his way out of the darkness himself, every time it came. And it came often during the war. Imagine fighting 2 wars simultaneously, one against Germany, one against your own mind. One external, one internal. One that everyone sees, one that you hide. Which is harder? Churchill never spoke publicly about his depression. That wasn't something leaders admitted in the 1940s. But it was there, constant, threatening to pull him under. And the only thing that kept him going was the belief that his work mattered more than his suffering. But here's the cruel irony. The work that gave him purpose was also destroying him. The decisions that kept him from despair were the same decisions that deepened his depression. He needed the war to fight the black dog, but the war fed the black dog. How do you survive that? How do you keep going when the thing that saves you is also killing you? Churchill survived by compartmentalizing. By drinking. By working so hard he didn't have time to think. By focusing on the next decision, the next speech, the next battle. By never stopping long enough for the darkness to catch him. But it caught him anyway. In quiet moments, in the middle of the night, in the gaps between crises. And all he could do was endure it, because giving up wasn't an option. Too many people depended on him. Too much was at stake. His personal suffering didn't matter compared to Britain's survival. So he suffered, and he kept working. And the cost kept accumulating. Clementine Churchill was a remarkable woman. She married Winston in 1908 and stood by him through everything. His political failures, his wilderness years, his mood swings, his obsessions. She managed their household, raised their children largely alone, and served as his most trusted advisor. But the war nearly broke her too. Churchill was never home. Even when he was physically present, he was absent, thinking about strategy, dictating memos, reading reports. He had no time for conversation that wasn't about the war. No time for the small intimacies that keep marriages alive. No time to be a husband instead of a prime minister. Clementine supported him, but she paid the price. She was isolated, exhausted, worried constantly about his health and the danger he put himself in. Churchill insisted on visiting bombed areas, on being visible during air raids, on taking risks that terrified her. She'd ask him to be careful, and he'd ignore her because he believed his presence mattered more than his safety. Their children suffered too. Randolph was serving in the military, often difficult and distant. Sarah and Mary were young adults trying to find their way. Diana struggled with mental health. And their father was a legend to the world but largely absent to them. Churchill loved his family, but he loved Britain more. Or perhaps more accurately, he couldn't love his family the way they needed when Britain needed him more. There wasn't enough of him to go around. The war consumed everything. Clementine once wrote him a letter during the war, gently warning him that his abruptness and rudeness were alienating his staff and colleagues. She told him he was becoming difficult to be around, that his temper and impatience were pushing people away. She signed it, "Your loving and devoted Clemmy," and asked him to consider whether his manner was helping or hurting. Churchill read it and reportedly wept. He knew she was right. He knew he was being impossible. But he didn't know how to be anything else under that weight. This is what duty costs. Not just your time or your energy, but your relationships, your ability to be gentle, your capacity for patience and kindness. When you're carrying the weight Churchill carried, you don't have much left for the people you love. And they suffer for it, even as they support you. Clementine endured, his children endured. But relationships don't pause during crisis. They strain, they fracture, and sometimes they break. Churchill was lucky that Clementine was strong enough to hold things together. But he knew what it cost her. And he knew what it cost him. The ordinary joys of family life, the peace of home, the comfort of being loved simply as a person rather than needed as a leader. That was another price he paid. And it was paid every single day, in 1,000 small moments of absence and distance. May the 8th, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. Church bells rang across Britain. Crowds filled the streets, celebrating, cheering, weeping with relief. The war in Europe was over. Hitler was dead, Germany had surrendered. Britain had survived, and Winston Churchill, 70 years old, stood on the balcony of the Ministry of Health and looked out at the celebrating masses. They were chanting his name. Churchill, Churchill, Churchill. He'd led them through the darkest period in their history, and they'd survived. Against all odds, they'd won. But the man who stood on that balcony wasn't the same man who'd walked into 10 Downing Street 5 years earlier. That man was gone. Churchill was physically broken. He'd suffered a mild heart attack in 1941 that was kept secret from the public. He'd had pneumonia multiple times. His blood pressure was dangerously high. He'd gained weight from stress and lack of exercise. He was exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix, a bone-deep weariness that came from 5 years of carrying impossible weight. He was emotionally spent. The black dog was waiting for him, and it would catch him soon. In the weeks and months after victory, Churchill would sink into one of the worst depressive episodes of his life. All the adrenaline that had kept him going, all the purpose that had sustained him, suddenly evaporated. The war was over. He was no longer needed in the same way. And without that desperate need, the darkness came rushing back. He was politically vulnerable. Even as crowds cheered him on VE Day, the British people were already looking toward the future. They loved Churchill, the war leader, but they weren't sure they wanted Churchill, the peacetime leader. 2 months after victory, in July 1945, Britain held its first election in a decade. Churchill lost. Decisively. The same people who chanted his name voted him out of office. It was a devastating blow. Churchill had given everything, his health, his happiness, his family time, 5 years of his life, to save Britain. And Britain thanked him by ending his premiership. He was hurt, though he tried not to show it. Clementine told him it might be a blessing in disguise. Churchill replied, "At the moment, it seems quite effectively disguised." But here's what's remarkable about Churchill's story. What he lost wasn't wasted. Yes, he sacrificed his health. But that sacrifice saved millions of lives. Britain could have negotiated with Hitler in 1940, many wanted to. If Churchill had been a different man, one who valued his own comfort over principle, he might have agreed. And if Britain had fallen, if Western Europe had remained under Nazi control, the world we live in would be unrecognizably different. Yes, he sacrificed his mental health. The depression never fully left him. But his willingness to endure that darkness, to keep functioning despite it, to keep leading despite it, showed that even our inner demons don't have to defeat us. Churchill proved that you can be broken and still be effective, that you can struggle with darkness and still be a force for light. Yes, he sacrificed time with his family, but Clementine understood, even as it hurt her. His children understood, even as they wished for more of him. They knew he was doing something that mattered. And in the end, they were proud of him, not just for what he accomplished, but for what he was willing to give up to accomplish it. Churchill's story teaches us something uncomfortable. Sometimes the right thing costs everything. Sometimes doing your duty means sacrificing your peace, your health, your happiness. Sometimes being the person others need you to be means losing the person you wanted to be. But it also teaches us something hopeful. Humans are capable of enduring more than we think. We are capable of carrying weight that seems impossible. We are capable of functioning while broken, of leading while struggling, of giving when we have nothing left. Churchill didn't win the war alone. Millions of people fought, sacrificed, and died. But his willingness to carry the burden of leadership, to make the terrible decisions, to endure the sleepless nights, to keep going when giving up would have been easier, made a difference. His sacrifice mattered. After he lost the 1945 election, Churchill returned to Chartwell. He painted again. He wrote his war memoirs. He spent time with Clementine. He recovered some of what he'd lost, though never all of it. The war years had changed him permanently. He was older, slower, more tired. The black dog visited more frequently. But he was also more reflective, more grateful for small pleasures, more aware of what truly mattered. He returned to power in 1951, serving as Prime Minister again until 1955. But that second term was different. He was older, less energetic, more focused on diplomacy than crisis. The fire that had driven him during the war had dimmed. He'd given his best years to the battle, and what remained was an older, gentler Churchill. He died in 1965 at age 90, having outlived most of his contemporaries. His state funeral was one of the largest in history. Millions lined the streets. World leaders came to pay respects. Britain mourned the man who'd saved them. But what they mourned wasn't just what he accomplished. It was what he'd been willing to sacrifice to accomplish it. What does Churchill's story teach us? It teaches us that leadership is sacrifice. Real leadership isn't about glory or power or recognition. It's about carrying weight that crushes you, making decisions that haunt you, and doing it anyway because someone has to. It teaches us that duty has a cost. When you choose to do what's right instead of what's easy, when you choose responsibility over comfort, you pay for that choice with pieces of yourself. Your health, your relationships, your peace of mind, and sometimes that cost is worth paying. It teaches us that we are stronger than we think. Churchill was 65, overweight, depressed, in declining health. By every measure, he should have collapsed under the weight he carried. But he didn't. He endured. And if he could endure that, what can you endure? What weight are you capable of carrying that you don't yet know about? It teaches us that sacrifice isn't wasted when it serves something greater than yourself. Churchill lost so much. But what he preserved, freedom, democracy, the survival of Britain, was worth what he lost. His suffering had meaning, and in the end, meaning might be all that makes suffering bearable. Most of us will never face what Churchill faced. We won't have to lead a nation through total war. We won't have to make decisions that cost thousands of lives. We won't carry the weight of civilization's survival. But we all face moments that test us. We all face choices between comfort and duty, between self-preservation and responsibility. We all have to decide what we are willing to sacrifice for what we believe in. Churchill's story is a reminder that those sacrifices matter, that the cost you pay to do the right thing, even when it breaks you, is a cost worth paying. That being the person others need you to be, even when it costs you everything, is how you become someone worth remembering. Churchill paid the price. He gave his health, his happiness, his peace. He carried weight that would have crushed most people. And he did it knowing the cost, accepting it, enduring it. Not because he was superhuman, but because he believed some things, freedom, justice, the survival of his people, were worth any price. What would you have done in his position? Could you have paid that price? And perhaps more importantly, what are you willing to sacrifice for what you believe in? What cost are you willing to pay to be the person your moment needs? Churchill shows us it's possible to endure the unendurable, but he also shows us what that endurance costs. The question is whether you're willing to pay it. Winston Churchill's story isn't really about war strategy or political maneuvering or military genius. It's about a human being who chose to carry impossible weight because someone had to. It's about what that choice cost him and why he thought it was worth it. We remember Churchill as the defiant voice on the radio, the V for Victory sign, the speeches that rallied a nation. But behind that public figure was a man who barely slept, who battled depression, who drank too much and worked too hard and pushed his body past its limits. A man who made decisions that haunted him. A man who lost precious years with his family. A man who sacrificed his health and happiness because he believed Britain's survival mattered more than his own. He wasn't perfect, he made mistakes. He could be difficult, stubborn, impossible to work with. He had flaws that grew worse under pressure. But he also had something rare, the willingness to pay any personal price to do what he believed was right. And that's what makes his story worth remembering. Not because we should all destroy ourselves for duty, that's not the lesson. But because we should understand that meaningful things often cost us something. That leadership isn't glamorous. That doing the right thing sometimes means losing pieces of yourself. And that those losses can be worth it if they serve something larger. You might never face what Churchill faced, but you'll face your own moments of choice. Times when doing the right thing costs you your comfort, your time, your energy, your peace of mind. Times when you have to decide whether what you believe in is worth what it will cost you. Churchill's answer was yes. 5 years of his life, his health, his happiness. Yes, it was worth it. Because some things matter more than personal comfort. Some responsibilities are worth the sacrifice. What's your answer? I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? And have you ever faced a moment where you had to sacrifice something important to do what you believed was right? What did it cost you? Was it worth it? Drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'm genuinely curious about your experiences. Because Churchill's story is extraordinary, but the truth is, we all face scaled-down versions of his dilemma. We all have to decide what we are willing to give up for what we believe in. And if Churchill's story moved you, if it made you think differently about sacrifice and duty and what it costs to lead, do me a favor, hit that like button. Subscribe to Archivist also you don't miss future stories about the human experiences behind historical moments. And turn on notifications. We release new stories every week about transformative moments in history. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's carrying weight right now. Someone who's sacrificing for something they believe in. Someone who needs to know that what they're giving up matters, that their sacrifice has meaning, that they're not alone in feeling the cost of doing what's right. Churchill's legacy isn't just that he saved Britain. It's that he showed us what humans are capable of enduring when something greater than ourselves is at stake. He showed us that we are stronger than we think, that we can carry more than we believe, and that the cost of doing right, even when it breaks us, is a cost worth paying. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. And thank you for caring about these stories of human resilience and sacrifice. Until next time, keep asking the questions that matter. What would I have done? What am I willing to sacrifice? And what do I believe in enough to pay the price? Stay curious, stay thoughtful, and remember, the greatest moments in history weren't created by perfect people. They were created by flawed human beings who chose to endure what seemed unendurable. See you in the next story.